Hello, everyone. Welcome back for session 3. So we're going to get started with Mike Johnson. He's the first speaker for session 3. So make sure while we're waiting for Mike's talk to start to grab some snacks. You can finish up with grabbing lunch. And then also keep in mind that we do have the QR codes posted on our screens. So if you want to ask any questions, you can submit your questions there. And then hopefully your question will get selected and we can ask our speakers those questions at the Q&A session. Thank you.
Several of you may already know who our next speaker is. The Air Force veteran who quickly rose to national stardom from ABC's hit series The Bachelorette and Bachelor in Paradise. Mike Johnson. So today, Johnson continues to transform audiences by showcasing his global influence through storytelling and breaking ground on conversations within sexology. Mike's talk is entitled Making You Better in Bed, and he'll dive into the impact of performance anxiety and how we should reframe our mindsets both inside and outside of the bedroom. So give it up for none other than Mike Johnson.
Picture this. Your heart begins to pound. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your muscles tense. You suddenly feel dizzy and nauseous. Your mind races with worry. Inside, your system floods with cortisol and adrenaline. No matter how hard you try, you can't seem to get back in the game. Fear has taken control. And that's when it happens, right there under the Friday night lights. You drop the game-winning touchdown. The feeling of fear quickly turns into embarrassment, then to disappointment, and then to shame. You had the opportunity to be the best. Instead, you perform at your worst. Now, picture that same feeling, that same fear gripping your body, that same feeling of disappointment. But imagine it's happening in the bedroom. And instead of dropping the game-winning touchdown, you're struggling with premature ejaculation, issue with sexual arousal, poor lubrication, disinterest, trouble getting or difficulty maintaining an erection. I'm talking about performance anxiety. The number one most reported social fear. See, when we think of things like performance anxiety, we think of stage fright or trouble catching the game-winning touchdown. Things where an individual feels that they may be exposed to possible judgment from others, where the shame may trigger their ego. But performance anxiety can occur in any situation, especially when an individual feels that they'll be treated. But performance anxiety can occur in any situation, especially when an individual feels that they'll be exposed to possible judgment from others, which makes a vulnerable situation like sex one of the most vulnerable places where performance anxiety can occur. Especially if we continue to treat sex like we do championship football games, as if it were a performance, when you had the opportunity to be the best, but you perform at your worst. This ego-driven competition, best versus worst, is embedded into our society everywhere, isn't it? We've learned to associate accomplishment with acceptance. We feel that we need to be the best in order to be respected, in order to be loved, in order to be seen. Think about it. In society, there's a right way and a wrong way for our bodies to look. On social media, did she like my post? Did he unlike it? Did she follow? Did he unfollow? In the military, you're either strong or you're weak. Winning the war or losing the battle. Even when I was on The Bachelorette, trying to find love quickly turned into a battle of who was the best. Either get a rose pinned to my chest, or send home licking my wounds in a limo. And there's a competition for everything, for masculinity, for femininity, for my blackness, for entrepreneurship, for televised networks, to all levels of corporate America and everything in between, and the nooks and crannies, the things that we haven't even spoke about. Nobody wants to lose. The potential for shame triggers the ego, and the ego then triggers more shame. Dropping that game-winning touchdown under the Friday night lights, that was me. I'll never forget, it was on the left-hand side. And struggling to get an erection on and off for years because of my mental health. And then the shame and silence that I had only made it worse. That was me too. Having those conversations in the mirror, I'll never forget it. When it first happened at the age of 18, I didn't know what to say. I couldn't talk to my homies about it. What would they say? Would they say that they've been through the same things? Or would they judge and ridicule me? Back then, we were all just trying to be the best, trying to be the man, whatever the hell that means. And my girlfriend, I couldn't talk to her about it at the time. I wanted her to know and believe that I had the potential to be the best. But it happened so often, she started beginning to think that it was her, when I just thought that it was me. The ego that I had and the shame that I felt only distanced the gap between us even more. And my family, I couldn't talk to them about it either. I grew up in a house full of beautiful women. I just wanted to be the man. And my father, he too wanted to be the man. Be strong, be silent. Even the urologist, the specialized doctor that I visited, wrote off any signs of mental health. He simply said everything was in proper working order and that the issue had something to do with my good morals, which just made sex feel like something I shouldn't be doing in the first place, despite what a beautiful and natural feeling it is for consenting adults. I just kept trying to overcome my fear and anxiety alone, be stoic, be brave, avoid shame, protect my ego. I thought that's what being the best was all about. But the more I tried to be the best, the less I talked, the worse I performed. What I didn't know at the time was that heightened anxiety and adrenaline fueled by shame and silence only constricts and makes it that much harder for the blood to flow into the penis, making it impossible to achieve an erection. It became this cycle of social, emotional, and physical effects, all stemming from my mental health, which ran much deeper than I ever would have thought. It took dedicated personal research, years of personal growth, and many vulnerable conversations to train my ego out of believing that it was my fault. And now I laugh thinking that I was the only one that was even going through it. Recently, I became certified as a sex coach, which allows me to share tips and advice with anyone who wants to know new and exciting ways about sexology and how to make the bedroom and other areas a more pleasurable experience. It also allows me to use my personal experiences to help those who are dealing with sexual issues and dysfunctions as well, to know that you are not alone. Because the truth is, performance anxiety and other sexual related dysfunctions affect up to 52% of men and up to 63% of women over the age of 18 in the US alone. With some rough, fuzzy math, that means that up to 141 million Americans will suffer with one or more of these sexual dysfunctions at least once in their lifetime. I am not alone. You are not alone. It may look different for you than it did for me, but for all of us, it feels the same. as if you're in a stadium full of people that just witnessed you drop the game-winning touchdown. See, when we associate accomplishment with acceptance, the ego tricks us into thinking that we need to be the best in order to be loved. It can lead to overwhelming fear of judgment and self-protection that could sabotage our ability to perform. Whether we're on stage playing a championship football game or simply trying to make love. See, that's the danger with trying to be the best when the world is deeply in need of better. Best thrives on unworthiness. Better thrives on possibility. Best thrives on competition. Better thrives on teammates. Best stays silent. Better learns to communicate. Sex is not this performance. Sex is a conversation. It's everything that exists in between the space between you and I. And we have the choice to create more space or to make more pleasure. Here's a few ideas that I share with my sex coaching clients. First, slow down. Impatience creates anxiety inside the body, which works against you. Patience allows you to breathe. It's one of my favorite recommendations as a coach. It allows us to drop out of our head and into our body. Sensual touch is another wonderful activity. Oftentimes, there's so many parts of the human body that go left unexplored because we feel like we only got two options. But practicing non-expectancy is a wonderful way to connect and get much deeper, much richer, pleasurable connection. And while we often think that sex toys are just used for self-gratification tools, there are lots of toy options out there that can be incorporated into partner sex as well. And here's a groundbreaking one. Share how you feel. And I know that may not come easy for you all, but here's a hint. It never does. So what I tell my clients, and I'll tell you, you and your partner, go take a walk. Think of an easy hike. It's open, you're out in nature, it's beautiful. You're together, but you don't necessarily have to look at each other in your eyes. My clients have mentioned that they love this exercise because it takes the pressure off of sharing with someone that you love. Talk about the things that really matter, the things that really eat at us. Fear, grief, shame. These self-limiting beliefs, the voices that are in our head. Don't be shy, talk about this stuff. It's happening to everyone. And yes, even performance anxiety. Fear is very powerful, yes, but it's also universal. It has the power to divide us if held in silence, but unite us if held in conversation. I recently started learning Spanish because I wanted to better communicate and converse with more people. And there's this beautiful saying, sea lo que sea, hablemos de ello. That's Spanish for whatever it is, let's talk about it. When we stop trying to be the best, sex actually gets better. Because in between the best and worst is you and me and all of us. I'm not the best or the worst. I'm better, and so are you. These are things that we all experience from time to time. So next time your heart begins to pound, your mind races with worry, the voices continue to get inside of your head, or your ego tells you that there's no other way for you to be loved, I implore you, don't quit the game. Don't go silent. Don't isolate yourself. Don't smile for the cameras while carrying the burden of your private life alone. Just start the conversation. I love you.
Mike, your points on the dangers of looking at everything as the best or the worst with no appreciation of the space in between is so helpful and so important. So thank you very much for inspiring us today. For our final talk of the session, we'll be hearing from Lisa Morgan, a self-advocate and consultant in crisis support and suicide prevention for autistic people. Lisa is the founder and co-chair of the Autism and Suicide Committee of the American Association. Our next speaker for this session is the wonderful Christina Newton. She's the founder and executive director of Hope for Youth, Inc. Her talk will explore her journey as a Black woman in tech and how that has inspired her to provide young Black girls the role models needed to succeed professionally. She seeks to create a generational change by providing hope and freedom from the fear of being an underrepresented minority in STEM. And I'm so excited to welcome Christina to the stage for her talk, I Can See Why Representation Matters.
I'd love it if you could humor me for just 1 minute. I want you to close your eyes and imagine yourself in a place that frightens you. Maybe you find yourself in a dark room or on the tallest skyscraper imaginable. Maybe you're on stage giving a TED Talk in front of hundreds of strangers whose eyes are piercing at you, just waiting for you to mess up so that they can post it on social media where it goes viral. Sorry about that, guys. Maybe that's just my fear. But now, I want you to imagine that you're joined by someone else. And this person, while you don't know exactly who they are, they do seem vaguely familiar. And they tell you, don't worry, it's okay. I know that you're in a scary situation, but trust me, because I've been in your shoes before, and I'm here to guide you out. Suddenly, that space doesn't seem so frightening. That familiar face becomes an instant source of trust. And when your body's natural fight or flight response to fear kicks in, that voice not only encourages you to fight, but it lets you know that you won't be fighting alone. I wish that I could let you know that I knew all of this to be true based on my personal experiences. But unfortunately, that's not my story. Because when I was getting ready to become Queen of the Hill as a 5th grader in my elementary school, my dad apparently was also becoming a king of the hill on his job. Growing up in Lake Charles, Louisiana, there were 3 main industries: the oil refineries, the casino boats, and agriculture. My dad worked at the oil refineries and had just gotten promoted to shift supervisor. So while he was preparing to move on up in his job, he also was getting ready to move us on out of the hood. Dad had always imagined that we would experience a better life than he had growing up, and that we'd have access to opportunities that he never did. For him, this meant building a huge 6-bedroom home for our 8-member family, leaving the inner cities of Lake Charles and moving into a mostly white suburban neighborhood right along the outskirts. For me, this meant existing in an unfamiliar territory for the first time in my life. So when I close my eyes and I think back to a situation that frightens me, I'm taken back to middle and high school. And it's not just because I was in a new environment. It's also not because of your typical new kid on the block experiencing hormones, dealing with popularity contests or the SATs. It's because I was fighting with feelings of doubt, loneliness, insecurities, and fear. And I felt like I had to fight through these feelings all by myself. There were not many people who looked like me at my new school. I couldn't find anyone who could identify with my struggle, who could let me know it's okay. I know you're afraid, but I've been in your shoes, and I'm here to guide you out. So during my adolescent years, as I was beginning to form beliefs about myself and make decisions about my future, I kept getting tripped up over this constant question of why. Why am I the only Black girl in my physics class, on the dance team, in the student government, or on prom court? Why are none of my teachers Black? Why does it suddenly feel so awkward to study American history or celebrate Black History Month? And why did we have to leave the Black community in order to have a better chance at success? Not only was I dealing with these unanswered questions, but I was also forced to navigate this new and scary environment through the lens and perspectives of people who likely knew nothing about what it was like to be me. And they probably didn't really even see me at all. After years of growing weary through battling through this question, when it finally became time for me to decide what I wanted to do for college, I couldn't think about what city the school was in or what major I wanted to declare. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about the cost of tuition or the credibility of an institution. My main concern was my deep, deep desire to finally escape to a place where I could feel seen and be safe. So I only applied to HBCUs. I landed at Prairie View A&M University, right outside of Houston, Texas. Go Panthers. And I majored in computer engineering. This was the best decision that I could have made for myself during that time. Because for 4 years, I could focus more on my future and less on my fear. While college was an amazing time, it was also short-lived. Because upon graduating with an engineering degree and getting a job, I then became a Black woman in tech. I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, which was another new city, and began working for one of the world's largest technology consulting firms. This time was meant to be exciting and a major milestone of success. But I was unfortunately met again with those feelings of doubt, fear, loneliness, and confusion. Confusion about who I was and my place in this world. This time was meant to be exciting and a major milestone of success. But I was met again with these feelings of loneliness, doubt, fear, and confusion. Confusion about who I was and the place that I held in this world. These once familiar feelings that I tried to put aside began to rise up within me again. And they brought back that question of why. Why am I the only Black woman on all of my tech teams? Why don't I see any women in leadership? And why, when I decide to have a conversation with my white male manager, does he feel it's okay to tell me, maybe you're being too idealistic? After 7 years of fighting that battle, I decided I did not want to fight anymore. And so I quit. I became yet another statistic of a Black woman who leaves her hard-earned and well-deserved tech career prematurely due to lack of support, lack of community, and lack of representation. And while I'm not always proud of my decision to quit, I do share my story proudly. I share it for those who need to know that their feelings and their experiences are valid and that they are not alone. Because somewhere out there is a young Black woman who is excited about trying to make decisions about her future while simultaneously confused about her place in this world. Because to be a Black woman in America who desires any level of success likely means that you're living in a perpetual state of confusion, fear, and striving. We start as little girls as we're trying to achieve the acceptance and prove our worth to our peers and school teachers. And we continue as young women, trying to climb the impossible ladder of success with steps that might include moving with your family to the suburbs, striving to get acceptance into the well-known Ivy League college. And if you dare to become a Black woman in tech who wants to take up space and be celebrated, then you go and work for a well-known company like Google. Now, I don't want to have to be the one to tell you what it's like to be a Black woman in tech who works for Google, but I'm sure that you can Google it. It isn't always obvious, but I hope that you're beginning to see what it's like to be the one, to be the only, to be the first, to live in constant displacement, transitioning from one scary environment to the next. And I wish that I could refer back to your body's natural fight or flight response to fear. But for many Black women, it's not as simple as a question of fight or flight. but it is a question. How much fight do I actually have left before I am finally forced to flee? So, how do we solve for this problem? When dealing with systemic issues that impact our entire society, we can't just focus on workforce development or putting a DEI Band-Aid on corporate America. If we really want to solve a systemic problem, it makes sense to start at the root rather than pacifying the symptoms alone. For this, it means giving girls role models who look like them while they are in grade school. It means being honest about the ways that our systems and institutions have failed us. It means connecting young Black girls to communities and role models who represent them and their experiences. As I began peeling back the layers of my childhood and really understanding the things that I was missing growing up, I also began to understand that Black women, mentors, and role models do exist. They're just not dropping out of thin air, and they're not being connected to the people who need them most. So I made it my personal mission and commitment to little Christina and other little girls who look like me, that I would be instrumental to making those connections. I decided to get back in the fight and try to change the system for good. So, in 2017, I started a nonprofit organization called HYPE. HYPE empowers Black and brown girls with technology skills so that they can thrive as future leaders in 21st century careers. But HYPE is also more than that. HYPE is a community of young girls who learn and grow together, celebrate one another, and receive mentorship from women who speak to them with a conviction that can only come from personal experiences. This conviction, this intention, this representation are the reasons why HYPE scholars are not only becoming amazing technologists, they are also becoming positive agents of change in their families, their communities, and in the world. Of girls so far, with the goal to do it for thousands more. But if that's gonna happen, we can't have young Black women following in my previous footsteps and leaving their tech careers prematurely. We have to encourage them to stay the course, fight the fight, and never give up. We do this by normalizing celebrating Black women in tech, by acknowledging their struggle and the invaluable contributions that they've made to the industry. We do this by connecting them to a greater purpose, which are these young girls who are depending on them for representation and rooting on their success. We also do this by understanding that when it's time to have a conversation about underrepresentation in any arena, that we can't place the burden solely on the shoulders of Black women alone. This is something that we must do together. This means more inclusive hiring practices and techniques. It means providing funding and scholarships for young Black people, as well as the organizations and communities that support them. It means diverse recruitment efforts across colleges and universities around the world. And it means learning how to create culturally relevant spaces that replace fear with trust for the young Black girls who are under our tutelage. Not only that, but if you are not someone who's underrepresented, it means becoming an ally who's not afraid of stepping aside and inviting someone else into your space of influence or authority so that they can more efficiently and quickly support the lives and dreams of the Black girls who you serve. We have to recognize that representation is not only a nice to have, but a necessity. When we are intentional about inclusivity and cultural relevancy for the young people who are learning and growing based on how we educate them, we finally bring voice and validation to the fears that they might be feeling. Fears that historically underrepresented people have felt for a very long time. Not only that, but we give them the confidence that they need to respond to this fear with a fight that doesn't give up and a hope to know that they're not only fighting for themselves, but fighting for others who might follow in their footsteps. And if we do this long enough, we have a chance at solving this problem for good and accomplishing HYPE's mission to empower an entire generation who lives their lives full of hope, driven by love, and void of fear. Thank you.
Christina, thank you for sharing your experiences with us. It's so important to raise the voices of women and communities of color to create the changes we wish to see in the world. And you really are inspirational and inspire future generations to pursue the same. For our final talk of this session, we'll be hearing from Lisa Morgan, a self-advocate and consultant in crisis support and suicide prevention for autistic people. Lisa is the founder and co-chair of the Autism and Suicide Committee of the American Association of Suicidology and a community council member of the group Autistic Adults and Other Stakeholders Engaged Together. Today, she'll teach us how people with autism can be harmed by well-intended actions, emphasizing the importance of listening to those with autism, on how to support rather than harm. So please welcome Lisa for her talk entitled Unintentionally Harmed by Well-Meaning People.
During the worst night of my life, when I was faced with a horrifying, life-changing experience, I found myself being repeatedly harmed by acts of kindness. Autistic people like me think and experience the world differently than non-autistic people, which is why it is so important to ask us what we need before taking any action to help us. Let me explain. I had been away from home for a while when I got a call from a neighbor telling me the police were at my house to do a wellness check on my husband and they needed my keys to get in. I arrived to find several police cars parked outside, all with their bright, flashing, disorienting lights on. The anxiety I had been keeping in check since the phone call started to unravel with the added sensory stimulation of those lights. A policeman took my keys and then directed me where to stand in front of the garage doors so I would be safe while they went inside to do the wellness check. What the policeman didn't know was he had just done exactly what he was trying to avoid because, due to my acute sense of smell, I realized, standing there alone, my husband was dead just a few feet away on the other side of the garage doors and had been for several days. When the policemen came back outside, they surrounded me to keep me from running into the house after hearing their news of them finding my husband's body. Again, to keep me safe. And yet again, I felt the opposite of safe because they didn't know they moved too fast or crowded me too close, or that I would feel the heavy, unexpected pressure of a hand on my shoulder for months afterwards when I thought of that moment. The kind-hearted victim advocate didn't know that her requests of me to interact with her therapy dog, sit in her car, or of her giving me all kinds of verbal information about community services was sapping my strength and depleting the energy I needed to make it through that experience. Instead of giving me support, she was taking what I needed away from me, inadvertently causing me more stress and strife. The neighbor who made the phone call asked me to join her for dinner, which meant having to make small talk, and that's my social kryptonite, an impossibility for me to do that night. And while I felt sad and anxious about having said no, I also felt alienated because she didn't understand how socially excruciating it would be for me to join her. At about 10 p.m., the police suddenly gave me back the keys to my house and everyone left. And then there was nothing but quiet, darkness, the empty house, and me, very much alone. The trauma I experienced that night taught me a lot about myself and others. And one thing I learned firsthand that opened my eyes to a fundamental experience of many other autistic people as well is that autistic people, like myself, can be unintentionally harmed by well-meaning people. The unintentional harms I'm talking about are typical actions one might do to help another person, such as the policeman putting a consoling hand on my shoulder, or the victim advocate encouraging me to interact with her therapy dog, or a neighbor inviting me to share a meal with her, all of which are good things, nice gestures, acts of kindness to non-autistic people, and perhaps to some autistic people as well, but most autistic people need something else. Autism is a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition that causes significant social, communication, and behavioral challenges. Our brains have a different structure, neural circuitry, and functioning. We experience the world differently than non-autistic people. One difference is we think and experience the world very literally. We either don't understand idioms or are very entertained by them. For example, if somebody says they're going to run to the store, in my mind, I think, it's 20 miles away, maybe you should drive. Social nuances are confusing, with lots of words being used differently than the dictionary meaning in everyday conversation, and nonverbal language is not readily understood, if at all. You see, trying to socially understand the people who were helping me the night I found my husband depleted my energy. In an effort to help, people were requiring more from me than I could give, which was causing me to experience higher anxiety, more distress, and to feel completely, utterly, and traumatically alone and misunderstood. I now believe the policeman's hand on my shoulder was a supportive gesture, but I didn't understand it at the time. To me, it was an unnerving violation of personal space that I never saw coming. I was confused by it. I couldn't tell if it had a positive or negative meaning, and it scared me. I needed people to understand that their help was hurting me, but I didn't have the capacity to tell them that night, nor did I even know how. While I had a sense that they were there to help me, their actions only increased my distress. What if I could have felt connected to all of those people that were there that night? What if their kindness and care comforted me, supported me, and helped me? What if, when I got the keys to my house back and everybody left, I knew I was by myself, but not alone? I knew something needed to change. The problem, of course, is that just knowing something doesn't matter much without a way to address it. And that's where you all come in. I propose a solution. You, professionals working with autistic people, researchers, friends and family who have autistic people in your lives, I invite you all to learn about autism from us, autistic people. I submit autism can only be understood by asking autistic people what it's like. The way we think, speak, and understand the world is unconventional compared to the majority in our society. Even our language is different. Sure, the words are the same, but the way we interpret them is much closer to the literal dictionary meaning, not the socially nuanced meaning used by the majority of non-autistic people. Also understand that the autism spectrum is not linear. It's circular, with strengths and challenges that change even throughout the day. And equally important, communication does not have to be verbal. All behavior is something being communicated. You see, we autistic people aren't challenged just by autism. We're also challenged from being misunderstood and from trying to conform to a society we don't understand, and to live with the majority of that society not understanding us. Understanding and being understood is not a matter of will, of trying harder, competence, or intelligence. The wiring in our brains is simply different. I and other autistic people like me need your help in sorting out a way of communicating that truly works for us all. We need you to understand us and then be okay with the differences between us. And I have lived experience showing that it can work. In the aftermath of my husband's suicide, I would sometimes get triggered and need assistance. One of those times, there was a person there who helped me by asking me what I needed before taking any action. She also didn't get frustrated by my literal way of communicating, my sensory needs, or how I understood the situation differently, or that I took longer to process things. And because of that, I felt supported. Like her, taking a moment and asking what is needed before acting can help other autistic people feel supported. It also generates an opportunity for you to hear us and to believe what we say we need and to work alongside us towards mutual well-being. And it can be difficult because oftentimes the action to take is to wait for an autistic person to be regulated, or to sit with them in silence, or to be there for them a few feet away. Autistic people aren't in a position to make social change alone, so we need you. We need you to listen to us, to hear what we say, and to accept our differences so we can be who we inherently are as people. The reason it's very important to ask before taking any action is because each autistic person is different. Like Dr. Stephen Shore once said, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. With autism being a spectrum condition, and each autistic person having a unique set of challenges and abilities, there is no standard set of rules to go by for anything that may happen. Here's how to help. Ask autistic people what they need for support before taking any action to help them. Listen to them, believe them, and then support them as they ask you to, even if it goes against your natural inclinations. I believe this is the change that needs to happen to solve the problem of misunderstandings, confusion, and unintentional harm that happens to autistic people when well-meaning, kind people try to help them. Step outside of the proverbial box of societal norms of how to help people and really listen and see the autistic person before you so you can learn how to intentionally, truly help and support autistic people with acts of kindness they understand. We need you to help us help you help us.
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing your
me so long. Well, you don't know how much you mean to me. 'Cause even though times got rough, you never turned away, you're right there. And I thank you. When I felt I'm not enough, you never turned away, you're right there. And I thank you. Hey, hey, I like this. Hey, break it down. Da 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 da. 'Cause even though times got rough, you never turned away, right there. And I thank you. Put your hands together. 'Cause even though times got rough, you never turned away, you're right there. And I thank you. You're right there. And I thank you, and I thank you.
At first we started out real cool, taking me places I ain't never been. But now you're getting comfortable and doing those things you didn't know more. You're slowly making me pay for things money should be handling. And now you ask to use my car. Drive it all day and don't fill up the tank. And you have the audacity to even come and step to me, ask to hold some money from me till you get your check next week. You trifling, good for nothing type of brother. Silly me, why haven't I found another? A baller, when times get hard, need someone to help me out. A scrub like you who don't know what a man's about. Bills, we pay your telephone bills, you pay my automobiles. If you didn't name, we could chill. I don't think you do, so you and me are through. Can you pay my bills? Can you pay my bills? I don't think you do, no. You and me are through. Now you've been maxing out my card. Gave me back credit, buy me gifts with my own ends. Haven't paid the first bill, but you steady heading to the mall. Going on shopping spree, perpetrating to friends like you be ballin'. And now you use my cell phone, calling whoever that you think's at home. And then when the bill comes, all of a sudden you be acting dumb. Don't know where none of these calls come from. Mom's thumb is here more than once. Good for nothing type of brother, silly me. Oh, a baller, when times get hard, need someone to help me out. A scrub like you don't know what it's about. Bills, can you pay my bills? I don't think you do, so you and me are through. Bills, I don't think you do know. So you and me are through. You trifling, good for nothing type of brother. Good for nothing. Silly me, what happened? I found another. Good for nothing type of brother. Hey, you trifling, good for nothing type of brother. No. What happened? I found another. Good for nothing type of brother. Silly me, what happened? pay my automobiles. I don't think you do. So you and me are through. Can you pay my bills? Bills. Can you pay my bills? I don't think you do. So you and me are through. Thou shalt confess.
Hi everyone, let's give it up for Ahana one more time. I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties before, but we have Lisa back, so we're so excited to do the second part of Q&A. So Lisa, hey, how are you? I'm good. Okay, so my first question for you is, what inspired you to give this talk?
Well, I wanted people to have a better understanding of how an autistic person might be unintentionally harmed by the people trying to help them, and also the sensory experiences and the communication and even their presentation, which can all lead to losing their intentionally harmed by well-meaning people trying to help them.
Awesome, and then one more question. How can students approach conversations with people going through a crisis?
I think just being very honest and using as few words as possible, getting straight to the point, and being very literal about what might be happening can be helpful for autistic people.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And sorry for the technical difficulties, but we have one last session, so stick around for that. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Perfect, guys. Thank you guys all so much for being here for our third session. We have one more session, like Pooja just said. But before we get into that, I just want to announce our giveaway winner for this session. So Karen Gu, if you are here, just come up to the stage and I'll hand it to you. We'll take about a 10-minute break before our next session. Thank you, guys. Also, a reminder to please go get snacks at our fun little snack table. We have popsicles, we have a lot of stuff. Thanks, guys.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back for our final session of the day, session number 4. Feel free to take your seats. You can get some leftover lunch or the snack table. And then just another reminder that we have our QR code posted next to our screen. So if you have any questions for our last Q&A session of the day, feel free to submit your questions there. Enjoy.
We're back, starting with Shanae Bullock, who's an enrolled Shinnecock Nation tribal citizen and descendant of the Montauk people in Long Island. She is a water protector, Indigenous perspective historian, and humanitarian. Today, Shanae will teach us how Indigenous people are the key to addressing environmental issues. In her talk, Indigenous Medicines of the Land and Water, she'll be talking about how climate change is a problem that everyone must solve together through the knowledge of Indigenous people, which has been passed down through mediums such as oral history.
Sakampanayu, Mishun, Netui Uskwa, Natasuis, Shinnecock, Montauk, Natchashiawank. My given name is I lead canoe, I am butterfly woman. I come from the people known as the people of the Stony Shores, Long Island, New York. The language that I just spoke actually was the first language that the settlers, when they first greeted the shores of Long Island, that was the language that they heard from our people, and we are still on those shores in Long Island. I'd like to give a living land acknowledgement to the Muskogee people whose lands I'm currently standing on. I'd like to acknowledge them and thank them for preserving and protecting the ancient knowledge of these lands, and for doing the responsibility of being a steward to not only the lands and the voiceless, such as the birds, the finned, the four-legged, and the trees and the plant life, and all of those that do not have a voice. The Muskogee people whose lands we stand on today, they are still those original to the land and to the water and to other people, because the earth is alive, and I am medicine to the land and to the water and to each other. We as Indigenous people, we are medicine to the land and to the water, and it is our responsibility to speak up for the voiceless, to teach one another, and by doing this, we save our world for humankind. But to do this, we have to know what our ancient histories are, what our ancient teachings are. And by doing this, we share this orally through generation after generation after generation after generation. And there was a time where we had an interruption into this way of life. And that interruption made it very challenging for us to still be the stewards of these lands and of these waters. But it is the plight of Indigenous people today that is calling to action all people to stand up for our land and our water and this planet. And so through that oral history that was shared, I gained that oral history from my mother. When I was a little girl, I learned how to swim in the Shinnecock Bay. My mother would swim so far out, and I would swim on her back, and she would swim very, very, very far out. Good thing she could swim, and I was holding on to her back. And as we swam, she would dive under so I could really get that water in me and really, really submerge myself in the water. And she would take me to a place in the water, and she would stand up, and she would take me off her back, and we would stand up, and I would look around, and we would be standing in the middle of the Shinnecock Bay. And she would teach me about the sandbars that existed through her entire lifetime. She would teach me about what it meant to be a Shinnecock woman, where to go and find the best clams, where to go and know where to harvest all of these different things that have preserved us. She talked about the times where she used to learn how to swim from her uncles and her dads and her aunts in the Shinnecock Bay. And as I got a little older, when we would go in the summers and we would swim, I wasn't quite strong enough to swim alongside her yet, but yet I was a little too big to swim on her back. So I had to watch her swim out to the places that she used to take me to. And there was a day where she would keep swimming and swimming and swimming, and she would swim and come up and swim and come up and swim and come up. And what I realized was she couldn't find those sandbars. And it scared me, because I thought at that moment that I could lose my mother. I thought that at that moment my mother could drown because the sandbars were no longer. And it was at that moment that we both witnessed and experienced something called bioterrorism. We experienced the interruption of our lives that our ancestors experienced. As I stand here today and have learned what climate justice is, what climate change is, what environmental sustainability is, I realize that my mother taught me what being medicine to the land and water was, just by giving me that experience of swimming with the land and with the water. Because I always say that if something was to happen to the Shinnecock people of the Stony Shore, then something would happen to that Stony Shore. And if something happens to the Stony Shore, then something's going to happen to Southampton. And if something happens to Southampton in Long Island, then something's going to happen to New York. And if something happens to New York, then something's going to happen to the rest of the world. You see, indigenous people are medicine to the land and the water. And we have a strong responsibility to pass down this knowledge from generation to generation to generation to generation. So with that ancient knowledge that my mother passed down to me, I want to share with the world on what this responsibility is. But first, let's go back. Let's go back to a time where there wasn't interruption in our world. There wasn't destruction to the land and to the water. Let's go back to a time where we lived freely as indigenous people all around the world. Imagine trees that were so tall, like so tall, that a squirrel could literally hop from tree to tree to tree to tree from Nova Scotia, Canada, all the way down into the Carolinas without ever touching the ground. Imagine how strong those trees were. And the languages that our indigenous people spoke under those trees, the mycelial network of these trees and forests were connected to us. When the settlers approached and they explored what is known as the Americas or the New World, they described our forests to be very giving and like spring-like. They said that they could literally run underneath the canopies of the trees and the ground gave. It gave like a track. And that was because our ancestors understood what a biocentric lifestyle was. We lived in harmony with the earth. We had controlled burns that we had during the rotation of our migration of being semi-nomadic. We controlled the burns, and that burning of the woods actually helped to give nitrogen back into the soil. See, everything that we did, we didn't take anything. We always gave back. So there was a rotation. Our clothes were made up of feathers and deer skin and plant fibers. We had traditional food ways that we migrated with the seasons. We ate with the seasons. We fished with the seasons. We foraged with the seasons. We hunted with the seasons. We respected one another. We had ancient trade routes that we traveled by carbon neutral vessels, watercrafts that didn't disturb the marine life, that didn't disturb the natural ocean sustainability. We helped to aid that ocean sustainability. And these are things that our waters still remember as we practice, just like that story I talked about with my mother teaching me how to swim and being a part of the ocean sustainability. See, our DNA remembers those things. So as I'm telling you this story, we're unlocking a genetic memory that has been blocked because we have experienced an interruption. See, we shared different things with each other. from trading different types of plants and seeds, such as the cannabis seed and the hemp seed. These are ancient trade industries that we've had for thousands and thousands of years that not only have sustained our life and our bodies, but has sustained the environment. But the interruption came when we began to share it with a people that did not view us as humans. And when that happened, there was an abrupt interruption in our entire lifestyle. Just like that story of the sandbars not being there. Our ancestors felt like they were drowning in a time of almost 500 years. That interruption caused laws to be made against our way of living. I call it laws against our way of living. The controlled burns were outlawed. We can no longer have controlled burns. Therefore, the forests started to grow diseases that we could not help to heal. And it started to kill off indigenous plants. A lot of times when we think about colonization or assimilation, we always think about the culture of the people, but we don't think about what happened to the interruption of the environment. You see, if we foraged with the seasons and we hunted with the seasons and those became illegal to do, then the environment no longer was getting what it needed from the indigenous people who are medicine to the earth. The languages were outlawed to speak. The mycelial network in the water and the marine life that responded to our languages, to our songs, and to our ceremonies could no longer hear that, could no longer have that connection with the people that cared about them. So that interruption wasn't just an interruption into our lifestyle, but it was an interruption to the planet. This interruption caused slavery and indentured servitude and residential schools. At the age of 3, a child could be kidnapped and taken from their home and forcefully put into a school system or an indentured servitude so that their parents could monetarily figure out a way to pay for their house, because we could no longer live in a house that didn't interrupt the land. You see, we didn't put holes in the ground and put concrete walls against the ground that blocked our connection to the mycelial network. We lived harmony on top of the ground, but that was illegal to do. So we had to forcefully be put into this system that interrupted our way of life. Not only that, it caused genetic trauma. It caused generational trauma. So the passing down of oral history and knowledge started to somewhat disintegrate and fade. But now we're in a time where each generation that has experienced this has found some sort of resilience to stand up and resurge and revitalize our languages, our traditional practices, from how we raise our children to the school systems that we put in. We have found a way to have a plight to return back this ancient knowledge. Not only that, it's not about returning this for indigenous people, but if indigenous people maintain a vast amount, I believe 80% or over 80% of the global biodiversity, and we make up less than 2% of the human population, the resiliency and the plight for this is not just for indigenous people, but it's for all people. But indigenous people who are medicine have not stopped preserving the earth. And those laws that were created against our way of living, we are now living in a time where we are being very innovative on how we protect and preserve the earth. We are living in a time where we are physically putting our bodies on the line to stop the rare earth minerals that are being drilled out of the earth, the pipelines that are being created, the oil that is being fracked out of the earth. We are putting our lives on the line to stop that. And that is not just for the sake of having something that we have always had, but this is for the sake of saving the world. We are being very creative in how we are creating our economies again and returning and reclaiming our industries. You're beginning to see agriculture thrive in ways that we are now using the language in our grow houses, in our greenhouses, in our our farmlands, we're able to utilize the same language that these landrace seeds have remembered. And now we are revitalizing a plant such as cannabis to heal the world with indigenous sovereignty. But we are still up against fighting the laws that have now been created for us to not be a part of these industries. You see, it's super important that we don't only realize that this is not just an indigenous problem, but if it is the mothers that bear children and through their DNA, from umbilical cord to umbilical cord to umbilical cord to umbilical cord, that they have taught this ancient wisdom. We are living at a time where we are still standing up to protect the woman, the missing, murdered, and indigenous women that are now being killed and raped at a high rate. We are at a plight to return back this ancient wisdom so that we can all come together. And it is through that we are finding innovation happen. And these are through products such as digital products. We're now living in a digital world where people are forgetting the importance that we have and responsibility that we have to the natural environment, to go and harvest and pick cedar and pick sage and use your tobacco and understand what creating a bundle is for you and what that is for the environment. You see, if we make this into a digital place where we can create ebooks, we can enter the metaverse, we can trade with cryptocurrency, understanding how to integrate in these ways, we can now also awaken the genetic memory of people that are in that space that have long forgotten about our responsibility. You see, indigenous people being medicine to the land and to the water, we can enter any space to remind other people that they too are land, are medicine to the land and the water. And that's what this is. This is something for all of us. This isn't just an indigenous problem. This isn't just a black problem. This isn't just a white problem. This is a human issue that we have to address. And it is the coming together. But it's very important to understand that that ancient wisdom that we carry as indigenous people, that we have taught to our children, that hasn't been interrupted, that is what we have to preserve. And that is what we have to protect. And that is what we all have to come together to communicate with one another and share our stories. So there's a call to action, and this call to action is that recognize that indigenous people are medicine. Allow them to heal not only the environment, but you as well. Because once that happens and you become healed, then you do the same and you share with other people.
Shanae, that was beautiful and incredibly inspiring. It's so important and how essential Indigenous people are to their native lands. As you say, they are the medicine to the natural environment, and we must listen to what they have to share. Our third and final student speaker for today is Gozweta Business School senior Isaac Borakovich. Isaac, a native to San Jose, Costa Rica, is passionate about storytelling and finding ways for companies to communicate through stories. In his talk, The Magical Secrets of Disney's Communication, Isaac will bring beloved Disney tales to teach us lessons about communication that we can really use in our everyday lives. So please welcome Isaac.
To all of you who have come to this happy place, welcome. Ever since I was a child and I was stepped through the gates of the Magic Kingdom, there was always one place I wanted to be above all. On board a pirate ship, soaring over the city of London while I prepared to fly into Neverland. To me, at Disney, there's no better adventure than the one we can find in Peter Pan's flight. Whenever I was a kid and I would come out of the ride, I would always be ecstatic at seeing Peter Pan defeat Captain Hook, and I would always ask my parents if we could go back inside the line to experience all that magic once again. But if I would have been a park guest back in 1955 when the park first opened, I would have come out of the same ride filled with no emotion other than disappointment. The engineers at Disneyland, or Imagineers as Walt Disney called them, were very excited to show the world the work that was done in Peter Pan's flight. You see, at the time they used a revolutionary design of an overhead conveyor system that would suspend the ride cart from the ceiling instead of the ground to give a true sensation of flight. This revolutionary design was one of the many reasons why the Imagineers were very excited to hear what park guests thought of this very special attraction. But to the Imagineers' surprise, when the park opened and the park guests came out of the ride, they came out doing nothing but complaining. Park guests would go into Peter Pan's flight expecting to see the beloved Peter Pan, only to find out that he wasn't even in the ride. Park guests would think that they actually missed him, would go back inside the line thinking that they would have to find the hidden Peter Pan, but the result was always the same: disappointment. You see, leaving out Peter Pan from his own attraction wasn't an oversight, it was actually done on purpose. The Imagineers wanted park guests that, as they went into the ride and looked at each of the most iconic scenes in the Peter Pan film, that they would be doing this from Peter Pan's perspective. But sadly, this message wasn't communicated well, and it wasn't received by the audience. And it took the Imagineers 5 years and many complaints later until they realized that they had to make a change. A projection of Peter Pan was added, so when park guests began to take flight, park guests' shadows would turn into Peter Pan's. Now, once this change was made, park guests would go through the ride amazed at both the creativity and experience of seeing everything from Peter Pan's perspective. Now, like in every Disney movie, there's always a lesson to be learned. The Imagineers learned the importance of communication for something as grand as an organization like Disney and as small as Peter Pan's flight. It doesn't matter if you have the most powerful values or ideas, if what you're communicating isn't received by your audience, the message does not exist. We have all been in that place where we say something to a friend or a loved one and we hurt the other side, not because of what we say, but how it was received. Our first instinct is often to say, "That's not what I meant." What the Peter Pan story highlights is that it's not our words that have power, but the power lies in how our words are received. It took the Imagineers 5 years to learn this lesson, but once they did, they showed an understanding and communication that they didn't have prior. They didn't just keep asking themselves why nobody understood this message. They saw that what they were trying to communicate wasn't being said properly and they had to make a change. Peter Pan's story highlights that we not only need to be respectful of how our messages come across to whomever we're trying to speak with, but that we can understand that if what we're trying to communicate is not received by our audience, we need to stop saying "that's not what I meant" and make the same adjustments that the Imagineers did when they added Peter Pan to Peter Pan's flight. The world of Disney has always played a key part in my growth, no matter what stage of my life I have been on. From the very beginning, growing up in Costa Rica, Disney films were the only movies I would watch in English, which quickly helped me learn the language from a very young age. Growing up, regardless of the fights I would have with my sister, we would always be able to bond over a love for movies like Lilo and Stitch. But now as an adult, Disney has taught me 3 lessons in the power of great communication that I want to share with you all today. We always hear that communication is what makes or breaks the teams we work in every single day. But Disney teaches that it's not just an idea of communicating, but having the right kind and the right environment to do so. Because of this, our journey today began with an absent Peter Pan, but will soon continue with a 14-year-old boss and will end in an exiled monster in the Himalayas. So, I hope you buckle up, remain seated with your hands, arms, feet inside the vehicle while we visit different Disneyland attractions and we learn the magical lessons of Disney's communication. We just came out of Peter Pan's ride, and now it is time to leave the land of fantasy and go into the world of tomorrow. In Tomorrowland, we can find fan-favorite attractions like Space Mounted or Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger Spin. But to me, the most impressive and immersive experience lies within Star Wars' very own Star Tours, where we can travel to distant planets like Hoth and Tatooine. Whenever I'm in the line for this very special attraction, I always look at R2-D2 jumping out of the spaceship that we're about to embark on, and I can't help but laugh at how this whole ride came to be. Now, if I told you that when Star Tours was pitched and put into production, that it was done by a 14-year-old kid, would you believe me? Well, Michael Eisner, the CEO of the company at the time, brought his 14-year-old son into Imagineering meetings and used him as a prime decision maker to accept or reject any proposed plans from Imagineering to put a new attraction into Disneyland. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't like a 14-year-old kid randomly becoming my boss one day. When Imagineering calls this story, they remember how frustrating and crazy it was that their next move would be decided by a 14-year-old kid. But it took them a while until they realized that they themselves see each other as kids in a playground designing the next big thing for Disney. Thus, the implementation of this kid into Imagineering was just the embodiment of having someone that would think and listen to just like them, but would be able to communicate with the CEO of the company in a far better degree than anyone in the team could. Now, I see a 14-year-old kid as someone who's typically rebellious and is never afraid to speak their mind. They're never the ones to simply agree with everything their parents say just for the sake of pleasing them. And what is interesting about the role that this 14-year-old kid played at Imagineering and the relationship he had with his father is that it mirrored a very similar relationship that Michael Eisner had with the president of the Walt Disney Company, Frank Wells. To Eisner, Frank was a perfect partner because he acted and had a much different inner child than what we're typically used to. Frank kept the part of an inner child that would never agree with someone for the sake of pleasing them. He was never afraid to go against Michael, the CEO of the company, and would always call him out if he ever did something that didn't sit well with him. It would have been incredible for this dynamic duo to continue at the Walt Disney Company. But sadly, right around the midpoint of Michael Eisner's Disney career, Frank Wells died. When he died, Michael lost the most influential person that was constantly making sure he knew of his mistakes and how to improve them. Whether it was the impact of losing such a beloved friend or the loss of such a great leader, from that moment on, Michael's leadership changed forever. He unintentionally began building teams of people who were unable to disagree with him and who were unwilling to be honest when he was doing something wrong with the company. Whether it was Michael Eisner's new micromanagement style, or having a bunch of yes men in his team, or even his constant fear that someone was trying to take over his job, Michael began making way too many mistakes and had no one inside that he trusted to be able to call him out like Frank Wells once did. Whether it was Michael Eisner's new micromanagement style, or having a bunch of yes men in his team, or even his constant fear that someone was trying to take over his job, Michael Eisner began making way too many mistakes and had no one inside that would call him out and be able to steer him in the right direction. Unfortunately, mistake after mistake, after 20 long years of service to the Walt Disney Company, Michael Eisner got kicked out. Michael Eisner achieved incredible things at his time at Disney. I will always remember him for how he positively changed the company. If it wasn't for him, Disney wouldn't be the company that it is today. But his legacy will always be tainted by his failure in his second half of his Disney career to hire people who were willing to speak up like Frank Wells once did. The origin story of Star Tours is a reminder to all of the need to keep our own inner child alive. The part of an inner child who understands the responsibility to communicate with whatever personal or professional relationship we have. Relationships that can't disagree with one another do not go far. This was proven to us by Michael Eisner at his time at Disney. We need people and teams that are willing to always speak up whenever they see something wrong. It can be something as small as telling your teammates you're not feeling well one day, or even talking about a team member that you feel has disrespected you. It could even be your best friend that said or did something that ended up hurting your feelings. You cannot expect that the other side knows what you're going through or even understands how you feel about their decisions. We can't expect that the people closest to us can read our minds and have an understanding as to how their actions make us feel. What we need to do is remember how Star Tours came to be and always keep that inner child alive like Frank Wells once did, when he was a team member that always understood the responsibility that he had to communicate. After our visit to the icy planet of Hoth on board Star Tours, I'm always in the mood for an icy treat of my own, from none other than the adorable snowman Frosted Treat Shack. Here, we can find the famous yellow snow cones offered to Mike and Sully when they were stuck in the Himalayas in the movies Monsters, Inc. But what is more refreshing than the snow cones we're about to eat is the story behind one of my favorite characters in the whole of Monsters, Inc. universe, the Abominable Snowman. When we first meet him, we learn that he was also banished into the Himalayas, just like Mike and Sully were. But the rumors of this character is that he went crazy and did terrible things leading to his banishment. But to Mike and Sully's surprise, they find a character that is not only kind, but doesn't understand why he's labeled the Abominable Snowman. He says, "Do I look abominable to you? Why can't they call me the Agreeable Snowman or the Adorable Snowman, for crying out loud? I'm a nice guy. Snow cones?" I see a character that has doubt in himself by the way that others have cast him out. He's unsure of himself, and it is directly due to the fact that he was unrightfully banished to the Himalayas and is seen as this black sheep. He has so much self-doubt that he doesn't even attempt to escape the horrible place that he's in. I could stop right here and tell you that the moral of the story is to never cast anyone out, to always be open to listening to people, because someone that is seen as the abominable snowman could really be the adorable one inside. But the lessons that this character teach are far deeper than this. Now, an interesting fact about the abominable snowman is that the voice actor that plays him also voices P.T. Flea from Bugs, Mac from Cars, Ham from Toy Story, and about 12 other characters throughout Pixar films. They're all voiced by John Ratzenberger. Now, after playing in 22 consecutive Pixar films, John became known as Pixar's Lucky Charm. But the question at hand is, why did he keep on coming back to play these characters? It's not like John from the very first Toy Story, Pixar management was like, let's hire this guy and have him play a character in the next 20 years of our films. In interviews, John talks about how Pixar was the only place that he felt he could come in with the craziest and funniest ideas, and he would always feel like he was being listened to. He talks about how, in essence, all Pixar movies are crazy and are really movies that you wouldn't be able to pitch to any other studio because no other studio would be willing to listen like Pixar does. When imitating someone pitching the movie up, he says, listen, I have an idea for a movie about an 80-year-old guy who attaches balloons to his house and floats away to Argentina with a Korean Cub Scout. Any other studio would call security. John would keep on coming back to Pixar because he saw it to be a place that anyone's craziest ideas was anyone's best. In any company, in any place of collaboration, what is most important is that you first find yourself in a place that you feel like you can speak your mind candidly, but feel that what you communicate is also listened to and heard as well. I always hear companies talking about how important it is to have diversity in our teams. But what Pixar highlights is that we can have a room full of the most diverse thinkers, but you have nothing if they don't listen to one another. Pixar's Lucky Charm isn't just John Ratzenberger. Pixar's Lucky Charm is their culture of consistently creating a safe space where we can communicate and share our ideas. We wouldn't have movies about how cars run the world, or how toys are animated beings, or even how a rat can become the best chef in the world if we didn't have a place like Pixar that focuses so much on creating environments that make us feel like we're listened to. In any relationship we find ourselves in, it's important to remember to carry our own Pixar Lucky Charm. A charm that reminds us that if we can all listen to one another and our different perspectives, that we will all be able to keep on moving forward, reaching closer to our wildest dreams together as a team. Our day is almost over, and we need to hurry up before the fireworks goes off. As I stand right in front of the Disneyland castle in anticipation of the show, I am reminded of everything that Disney has given me. As a kid, Disney has let me fly into Neverland, reach the island of Tortuga to meet Captain Jack Sparrow, or even let me enter the Twilight Zone in a fallen elevator. But as the fireworks begin to explode, I am reminded of everything that Disney has taught me today. In our lives, we all find ourselves in relationships, teams, or even organizations that we feel do not understand us. We might even sometimes be a team member that makes someone else feel like the abominable snowman. But through an understanding of the 3 stories I have just told you, we can ensure to never see abominable teams and only see the adorable ones. By understanding the power of how messages are received and changed, by creating the responsibility to speak up, and by embracing a culture that creates a safe space to communicate, we will all be able to stand around our teammates and our closest friends, looking at the fireworks, reminiscing on all the magical work we have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. Your insights and analysis of Disney has really led me to a different understanding of how we can all bring aspects of Disney into our own lives. And I will say, as someone who teaches and trains in the area of communication skills, you nailed it. The speaker to wrap up TEDxEmory's 2022 main conference is the poet Jay Nichelle. She's a Tulane University graduate and a storyteller on the page and on the stage. Jay writes for her younger self, who never dared to dream her voice was worthy of being heard. And today we are lucky enough to hear her talk, reclaiming negative labels using poetry. Please welcome Jay as she talks about why it's so important to reclaim the power of the negative words or labels that have been used to hurt and belittle people.
Has anyone ever called you stupid, ugly, weirdo, geek, or any sort of negative label? Did it make you feel kind of bad about yourself? Maybe you felt like that person or group of people had some sort of power over you that affected the way you saw yourself. And maybe that interaction affected your future interactions with other people. What if I told you you could take that power back? And what if I added that poetry is a surprising way to do so? I'm a poet and spoken word artist. And one of the first poems I ever performed at my very first poetry slam in the 9th grade was called She Ugly. She ugly, a common phrase she heard in middle school, and frankly, everyone is awkward in middle school, but she wasn't even a little cool. Like, she would go home and wonder if her parents wept for her because all Disney said was that only beautiful women become princesses, and if she couldn't be a princess, then what was left for her? She ugly. Those were the words of 9th grade me, back when all my poetry rhymed. In that poem, I talked about being bullied all through my childhood and how the word ugly had negatively affected my self-esteem. How I heard it so often that I began to associate myself with it and use it to describe myself before anyone else could. I ended on a positive note, however, saying that I would not allow that word to sting anymore. I went to my second slam the next month, and I will never forget this ever. A woman I did not know walked up to me and went, "She ugly." And I was like, whoa, 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 what's happening? Why is this woman calling me names? And so I look confused, of course, and she repeats it, getting closer to me and goes, "She ugly. I heard your poem last month. It really stuck with me." I was so relieved I didn't have to fight somebody at a poetry slam. But more importantly, I was excited that someone had remembered what I said. For the rest of high school, whenever someone would call me ugly, I would joke in my head and think, wow, my poem is really popular. Everyone knows it. I didn't know it then, but that was my first experience with word reclamation and the positive effect that it could have on my self-esteem. For that reason, I want to share with you the power of reclaiming words through poetry today. So, what exactly does it mean to reclaim or reappropriate a word? Linguistic scholars Galinsky, Bodenhausen, and Groom define reappropriation as the phenomenon whereby a stigmatized group revalues an externally imposed negative label. These scholars created a widely studied model for word reappropriation specifically for marginalized groups. The bottom level of this model is self-labeling, so when an individual decides to use a negative label for themselves. Me calling myself ugly would be a low-stakes example. Another low-stakes example of this would be the word geek. Geek used to be such a mean thing to call someone, and now plenty of people self-identify as geeks. It's basically cool to be a geek. And given these examples, we know that word reappropriation is not something new. People and groups across time have always tried to find ways to revalue the words used against them. One example of this is the word queer. Queer has a long history as a derogatory term, and now, thanks to scholars and activists who have pushed and redefined and shaped that word to put it into the mainstream, plenty of people use queer to self-identify, taking away the stigma associated with that label. Another example, in 2016, the phrase nasty woman. It was immediately given a positive connotation by many feminists who, in a span of a year, put the phrase on book covers, t-shirts, TV shows, all sorts of places, and it was redefined in Nina Donovan's viral poem titled Nasty Woman. Another example of how poetry is constantly at the forefront of reappropriation. Now, as you move higher on this level of this model, there are plenty of places where things get more complex. Group success compared to individual success at reclaiming words can vary. And reclaiming a slur or hate speech is a little harder than reclaiming a mean word like ugly or geek. But I want to keep the conversation on individual reclamation because that is where change can start in your life right now. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, okay, this all sounds great, but what does it have to do with me? How can I benefit from reappropriating words? Well, I have 3 ways that word reappropriation can positively affect you. And the first 2 go hand in hand. They are identity formation and self-esteem. Growing up, I was told, as I'm sure many of you were told, that words can't hurt me. Oh, it's just a word, let it go, move on, right? But the truth is, words do hurt. Words have meaning, and the ones that we attach to ourselves and other people affect the way that we move around in the world. On this subject, linguist John E. Joseph explains that our very sense of who we are, where we belong and why, and who we associate with, all have language at their center. Similarly, cognitive researcher Adam M. Kroom explains that the target of a slur can end up with a damaged sense of self-perception and self-esteem. His research shows that being negatively labeled can not only affect you in that moment, but it can have an effect on you for the rest of your life. Such an experience is highlighted in Countee Cullen's famous poem from 1925 during the Harlem Renaissance titled Exigent, where Cullen shares, "Now I was 8 and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until December. Out of everything that happened there, that's all I can remember." Incidents like these can stick with a person and overshadow other experiences. But when we can control the labels used against us, we can increase our self-esteem and our overall self-perception. The final reason is power. Reclaiming a negative label is a way for an individual to subvert the power move that is calling someone a name. Calling someone a name is just a way to put them on their place in some supposed hierarchy and demean them, right? One example of this subversion that Galinsky and his colleagues use is an episode of The Simpsons, where Homer gets mad at a gay person for self-identifying with the word queer, telling that person, "You can't say that, that's our word for you." Because Homer did not have a tool to express his superiority to this person anymore, he became upset. Now, there are exceptions, of course, but reappropriation often comes with an increase in perceived power for the person doing the self-labeling. For me, poetry allows me to reimagine the world around me, to create something new or repurpose something old. I find poetry to be the perfect vehicle for reappropriation because poets are constantly challenging and redefining language. There are so many examples of poets I admire who have redefined and challenged the constructs of labels and words, just like Brittany Rose Capri in the poem We House defines house as in our skin is not for mourning, as in drum beats, as in we still don't need to know the same language to speak. Antonio de Jesus Lopez's book of poetry, Hentification, reimagines a world and a word that is the opposite of gentrification. And Danez Smith, in the poetry book Homie, imagines a slur used against gay men to mean akin to a king, mighty, different, a good kind. Plenty of people have spoken on poetry's ability to subvert language, but I particularly love Rita Dove's phrasing when she says that poets have the power to enact change. A writer can make the word dark mean something positive. You can relieve a word like hysterical of its misogynistic implications. You can make the language your own. That is the power of poetry. I'd like to conclude now with a poem of my own, starting with naming. The American Ornithological Association names and renames birds when they encounter new relevant information. That is how the whiskey jack became the Canada jay, became the gray jay, became the Canada jay. Again, I'm regurgitating this information from Google because my rabbit hole searching led me to discover the AOS's most recent dilemma, a campaign to change the common names of birds named after the people who discovered them to something more appropriate for a bird. I imagine the AOS to be a room full of men ruminating on the use of maroon versus sanguine as they come up with titles for animals who will never ever answer to either one of those words. And I started to wonder, what makes a name appropriate for a bird? But I don't watch birds. I was, however, reminded of a time that I spent watching kids closely, learning more and more about their idiosyncrasies with each passing day and using those to tailor my interactions with them, making notes like, Kyla will always turn her fruit cup upside down on the table, so don't give her one without supervision. If Bryson doesn't have his fidget spinner, he will pull out the carpet instead, so keep an extra. And Julie. I had a lot of notes about Julie. Every day, something new about Julie. Julie won't sit, Julie won't listen, Julie won't eat, Julie won't answer me when I say, Julie, what's wrong? What do you need? At the end of the summer, a kid came running in from playtime to tell me, Juju fell down and got hurt. I asked, who? Julie, she answered. We call her Juju. I approached the scene, Band-Aids and a wipe in hand, and I said, here, Juju. She hears Juju and blushes slightly. From the ground, she looks up and asks me, how you know my name? And I apologized for going off my roster and never even asking. I made a new note that day. Juju just wants to be called by her name. I think if we listened, the birds would tell us. In college, I was told I couldn't have my preferred name on my diploma, as if what I call myself matters less than what the government does. A girl called Jay did all the work and was erased from the proof, and admin tells me it's just easier to track this way, and I'm sure it is, but I counter with so. Is a name only about control? I'm called what I am called for a reason, and who has the power to call me if not me? We assign names to birds as an attempt to classify them, and we rename them because we cannot possibly. We do the same to people. Assigning names for easy classification instead of calling someone's name because you want to relate to them. So I finally asked the kids their names. I found out that Bryson goes by his middle one, but only around his friends. And no, I don't count as that right now, but I might one day. And Adrina is pronounced Adrina and not Adrina. And Brielle associates her government name with being in trouble, so she's just like Brie if I'm not mad at her. And Kyla is cool with Kyla, but she wouldn't mind a cool nickname if I give her one, so I call her Killer Kyla, and we laugh every time. I feel closer to them all. I tell them to hold their names to their chests and protect them because the world, I say, will try to assign you so many you'll forget what your real one is. If you don't name yourself, someone else will. You'll fall into the lazy classifications of others who could never understand the fullness of you, so they give you a box and get mad if you don't fit in it. And I've named myself so I remember myself. So I don't answer to just anything. And I'm saying, if we listen, I think the birds might just tell us all their names.
Jay, your words are so impactful and resonated so much. And I loved your argument for word reappropriation. And I think maybe that's something, you need to start a movement.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out to the TEDxEmory 2022 main conference. It's crazy how quickly this day has gone by and that we're already at the end of the day. Before we wrap things up, we want to take this opportunity to ask some of our guest speakers from the fourth session some questions. So my first question is for both of you. What inspired you guys to give your TEDx talk? Shanae, you can go first.
I'd like to say that the land and the water, people don't really understand their voice. So it's our responsibility, my responsibility to let people hear what that voice really is, because it's all of our issues.
Well, originally I just really loved Disney, if you can't tell, and I really wanted to figure out a way to share stories that I've learned through Disney. But every time I would recruit for any advertising firm, I would always use the Peter Pan story as to why I'm interested in advertising and why I'm interested in storytelling and communication. I just wanted to extrapolate and build on that story and everything that I know about Disney, I guess.
Shanae, this question is for you. How can we as college students be more cognizant of the land and history we are on?
Well, I first like to kind of put that word Native American or indigenous in that answer, because every university in the entire country is on indigenous land, and the history sometimes of these universities come through a land grab, and that land grab usually is from taking land from indigenous peoples, but a lot of times that's not put in the forefront at the university. So I think maybe kind of figuring out what Native people is the land on. You can go to www.native-land.ca, and you can literally type in anywhere in the world where you're at, and it'll tell you exactly where you're at.
Thank you. And Isaac, this question is for you. What is an example of a time that you applied a Disney lesson in your life?
Well, I feel with my friends, especially with one of my closest friends, which is he's an audience member. Whenever, and also with my girlfriend, whenever there's like a miscommunication, and anytime I communicate something and I say something I didn't mean, and I instinctively say that's not what I meant, he always tells me Peter Pan, and I would just tell myself in my head, Peter Pan. It doesn't matter. I just have to accept that what I said wasn't received the way that I meant it, and I just have to move forward from that and stop saying that's not what I meant.
Thank you both so much. Before I turn the mic over, I just want to thank everyone for coming and say that as a member of the TEDxEmory team, that it was a great experience and has been a great time getting to work with the team at large. We had a lot of fun putting this on, and it was great to see all of our hard work turn into a reality. I also want to give a special shout out to the directors and to Hope, so thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us this year. We appreciate your ongoing support and hope you enjoyed the ideas shared, the conversation sparked, and the relationship forged today. Here at TEDxEmory, we challenge ourselves to engage in powerful discourse and innovative thoughts by searching for new and transformative ideas. Year-round, our 4 dedicated committees work tirelessly to plan, coordinate, and execute such amazing events such as this. Since joining my freshman year, I've been truly amazed by the talented organization that TEDxEmory is. We are grateful for the support our organization has received from all corners of Emory and the new administration. Also, without the help and direction of our advisors, Franz and Jobs, we could not be where we are today. Additionally, we would like to extend our greatest thanks to our sponsors today: College Council, Neil Hodges' Woodruff School of Nursing, the Institute of the Liberal Arts, Lillian Carter Center for Global Health and Social Responsibility, Emory University Economic Department, and most importantly, we must thank everyone present here today. Your engagement and enthusiasm serves as an inspiration for our future speakers and sponsors to continue the TEDxEmory tradition. Lastly, I would like to thank our amazing board of directors and also our GBM who's worked tirelessly to execute this amazing event. And finally, to wrap things up, we have our last giveaway for today. So our last 2 final giveaway winners go to Lisa Liu
and Honey Taylor.
Thank you guys all so much for coming out today, and we hope you guys enjoy.